to America's Future. Today we have on Luke Brown, and I was on the podcast on Freedom First West Texas, so I will let him introduce himself because he knows exactly what he's doing, and so I'll let him go for it.
Well, thank you. My name's Luke Brown. I've known Timothy for a few years now. We had the privilege of working together with Freedom First West Texas. We co-hosted, I think, in the double digits on podcasts for the Freedom First West Texas podcast. So Timothy's been a great help for our organization and really helped us advance all of those conservative goals that we had. In the past, too, Timothy and I, we just go back doing all the different Freedom First stuff. I think you started out as an intern for us, and then we just started that relationship from there, and then kind of worked out everything. And now you're, doing this great podcast, which is awesome. Love it. I think the Freedom First podcast helped you get your footing and kind of the podcast stuff, and now you're doing this, which is awesome. So I think of this as like kind of the continuation, like the spinoff of the Freedom First podcast in a way, since we're all kind of away. Just a little bit about me for the people watching. I'm originally from Texas. I now am in Washington, D.C., working in politics. So working in conservative politics here in D.C. So a very wild time. Everything's going on. But I definitely enjoy it. It's a great time being in D.C., even though it's a very liberal city. With the Trump takeover and everything, a lot of good things are going on in the city. But yeah, I'm definitely very much a political person. Love politics. Love getting to talk some politics with Timothy. I'm sure we have, from just what we've talked about before this episode started, we definitely have a lot to talk about. But I'm excited. I don't know if I'm worthy of being a guest on this show because you've had a lot of cool people. I don't know if I'm that cool. But I will try my best. But yeah, just happy to be here, happy to discuss all of the things going on in politics and other things too. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Luke, and DC Insider. That's always what we're looking for. So
here you go.
All right. Well, I think the first thing that I want to talk about is the big beautiful bill. I mean, everyone knows that it gives us lots of tax cuts and everything, and but they place limits on them, and no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. Those are the big ones, and then an extension of the Trump tax cuts from when his first term. And what was big about it was that the limit was actually it's like $160,000 and below, and then you get the tax break from the $160,000 and less. And I think it's like you have to if I want to say it's something about, it said something in there about if you are filing your taxes jointly. Something about that. There's a stipulation in there about filing jointly. I don't quite remember that, but in the $160,000 goes for both the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. So that was that's really the big thing there, and I remember listening, of course, to Alex Jones, and they're talking about there's some things in there that they really don't like. And I was looking at the summary, and there's so many things, and there's so much. And I was also looking at the bill itself, and there's so much jargon and strike out this phrase and add this phrase. It's like, what in the world? I have to go look at the summary if I want to get any of this. So it was kind of hard to take it all in, but because there's so much, I didn't really get to see any of those things that they were talking about that weren't good. But just from what I saw, I think it was pretty good for the American people. But then I don't know if you saw that after it passed, Trump was like, "Oh well," and then now we're gonna go make sure that see what we can do to help people who who are out on the farms, who the immigrants who are on the farms, and what was the other one that? Um, oh yeah, and hotels. You know, the people who the room service people. And he said we're gonna go. We're gonna make sure they give them amnesty. And I don't know what did you hear that, Luke? Did you hear about that? Did you see that?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. Heard some things about that, but you want to go into the big beautiful bill first, and then because that's like two whole massive things right there. So, do you want to dig into the big beautiful bill
Yeah,
with?
let's dig into that. What are your thoughts, Luke?
Family?
After everything that I said.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't ignore that. The one big beautiful bill, at the very least, and this is not exaggerative at all. It's probably the most comprehensive, sprawling, massive, most massive piece of conservative domestic policy legislation that we've seen in decades. We didn't see anything like this in the first term. We saw some tax cuts, but nothing this sweeping, nothing this broad, nothing this kind of cumulative in one big bill. And I mean, I think it's a culmination of a lot of different things. We've been trying to get a lot of the provisions in this, most notably the tax cuts. I mean, the fact that the Trump tax cuts are now permanent is a huge deal. Almost always tax cuts are temporary. Even like if you look back, decades, a lot of the times they always sunset. And I know there's some provisions that sunset in this bill, but the fact that basically the Trump tax cuts are essentially made permanent is a really big deal. And that means that now we don't have to worry, a few years down the line, coming back, worrying about having to pass another bill that would, prevent taxes from raising. So I think, on that front, it's a massive success. I think when you talk about, some of the limits, you can't have it both ways. There's people that have been complaining about, the fiscal reality of the bill and that it costs too much, while at the same time complaining, that it doesn't cut enough taxes and that it doesn't do enough. So, you can never kind of get to either one of those sides. There's always going to be some trouble either way. But I think, at the very least, whether you, 100% agree with what's in the bill or not, you cannot ignore that it is a massive win for the Republican Party. We don't just get tax cuts. But we get Medicare, Medicaid reforms. That's something we've been trying to do for decades, which people have said, hands off Medicaid and all that. But we say, no, we want to make it better. We want to make sure that we're getting the waste, fraud, and abuse out of Medicare, out of Medicaid, so it can actually serve the American people better and not bankrupt our country in the process. So I think there's a lot of wins in this bill. I think some of the dissenters had some, some solid objections to it, but I think, we can't ignore the wins in here. And I just have some stats here which are interesting, which kind of tell you about the success of this bill. So it's the largest tax cut in history. It puts an extra $5,000 in the pockets of average families. It will decrease their tax bills, and those making between $30,000 and $80,000 will pay roughly 15% less in taxes. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, up to I think kind of the 3,000 weekly mark. Again, there is a limit, but that's still thousands of dollars that the average American is saving every single year. So contrary to popular belief that this is just, bailing out the billionaires, no, it's going to save the average working American thousands of dollars every single year, which is huge. That's going to spur economic growth. That's going to spur investment in, small rural communities. It's really a big deal. We also have the no tax on Social Security. That's huge for ensuring that our seniors, who are already not necessarily being taken care of as much as they should be, that's going to ensure that they have more money in their pocket, especially since the majority of seniors rely on Social Security for the primary source of their income. So that's really big. Also, some lesser things talked about in this bill that I think are interesting. It boosts the child tax credit. That was kind of a bipartisan thing that both sides acknowledged is good. It opened savings accounts for newborns. I think this is called the Trump account or whatever. But it actually allows kind of a lot of financial growth in that, which is a huge deal. They expanded access to childcare for families, expanded health savings accounts for families, scholarships for school choice. All these things are in this bill. So it might not be perfect, and we're never going to have a bill that's perfect, but we cannot ignore that this is one of the most fundamental pieces of conservative legislation passed in decades. And it's not going to benefit mainly the billionaires, the rich, the elite. No, it's going to put thousands of dollars back in the pockets of working class Americans who overwhelmingly voted for Trump because they know that Trump and the Republican Party are the ones actually looking out for the middle class. The Democrat Party has been leaning towards the socialist side. The American people don't want that. They don't want government to just take care of them. They want government to get out of the way so they can kind of unleash that growth. And I think that's what the Big Beautiful Bill does really well. So a massive win. I acknowledge that the bill had some shortcomings for sure. But all those things that I just listed to you, all the Democrats and I think the 2 or 3 Republicans, they voted against all that. And so I don't think you could justify voting against, some of those massive wins. So that's kind of my opinion on the bill. Was it as good as when it was first passed in the House? No, nothing ever is. Things get changed. But this is a massive win. And the fact that it got, just to wrap up here, the fact that it got, passed by the July 4th deadline, that's what the president said. It's a huge difference from the first term. In the first term, we struggled. The tax cuts, we didn't get the tax cuts till year 2. And even then, one of the other landmark pieces that we wanted to do was repeal Obamacare. Our own party couldn't even do that when we were in power. So really a lot of massive things happening here. But overall, I think it's a huge win for the Republican Party, huge win for President Trump. And it shows that this administration, I think, is going to be different than previous Republican administrations. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on the bill, to be nice and succinct.
Yeah. No, and I remember we had a discussion of good old friend Thomas Massey. He voted against it because he said it wasn't fiscally conservative enough, partly because it raised the debt ceiling. And I think that's the raising the debt ceiling. I just I don't see that.
Yeah,
that's really what upset me the most. And I think I do see where you're coming from with the, it's most conservative, like, for tax cuts, helping Americans and everything. But I think it's lazy and the Democrats all want about raise the debt ceiling so we can spend more money. And no, we don't want to spend money. We need to cut the spending. We don't need to raise the debt ceiling. And I think that's why.
Yeah. I think one thing that's critical to realize is that in past times when we raise the debt ceiling, what is it for? So the government can spend more. But for this bill, we're having to raise the ceiling because we're decreasing our revenue. And so I think that's a really big difference that we have to realize is here. This is not where the government's trying to spend more. No, it's actually trying to let the American people take more of their take-home pay. So I think some of this stuff about the debt ceiling is a little kind of not recognizing a lot of the stuff that's in the bill. I think this bill only, bloats the debt if we subscribe to this ideology that letting Americans keep more of their tax dollars is bad, which I don't think is bad. I don't think that bloats the debt. I think the Congressional Budget Office and all those other offices fail to account a lot of the other economic growth that's going to help pay for this tax cut. They've been wrong about a lot of things in the past. So I think that's a valid concern, but I do think we have to kind of make that differentiation. As in the past for like CRs and all that, that was to fund the government. We raised the debt ceiling so we could keep spending and spending. But in this case, we raised the debt ceiling so we could cut some of that revenue that the government was taking in. And so that's why I think it is fundamentally different. And that's why I think it's always hard, especially with tax cuts, to kind of amount for that spending difference. And that's why I always think it's hard to tell how much we're going to cut or how much we're going to increase the debt by. So I would remain skeptical of those numbers. But yeah, I think, if we have to raise the debt ceiling in order to ensure that the average American can take home thousands of dollars more in their paycheck every year, I think at the very least we can recognize that that's fundamentally different than from raising the debt ceiling to pay for, more money to Ukraine, more money to other countries, bigger government. And that's not what we're having here. We're raising the debt ceiling so we can actually reduce the money that the government is taking in. So again, I understand there's still concerns with that, but I think that's kind of the mindset that a lot of the, and including myself, kind of the more Republican or kind of the more mainstream, sort of less fiscal hawks, I guess you could say, have. But also something about this bill too, it does cut the deficit by over 1.2 trillion over the 10-year period. It has the single largest deficit cut, I believe, of any spending bill like it. So we might have some concerns about that, but we do have to recognize too those massive, sort of wins in the realm of spending. So it's not perfect, and I do think your concerns are valid. But I think this at least lays the groundwork to come back, especially to issues like what you're saying. We'll see if that happens. But that's just my 2 cents, is I think there's a little bit of a difference. But
Okay, so I hear where you're coming from, and I just agree with that. That's the other day too when we were talking. But why, if it lowers the deficit and people take home more money, then they're willing to spend more money, and that's what people like Democrats and they say, oh, we need to raise taxes to bring in more money. Well, if you cut taxes, people will spend more money, and it actually increases the revenue because people spend more money. Even though you cut taxes, they still spend more, and so, and that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. So why would we need to raise the debt ceiling
Well, because
if
the
that's the
debt ceiling and
case?
the deficit calculations don't take into account that revenue. It's just a strictly mathematical like equation number. It doesn't take into account. That's why the congressional budget analysis, all these things telling you that it's going to substantially bloat the deficit, or they don't take into account that the increased revenue. It's strictly a mathematical like okay, this if we it's just counting if we cut the government revenue by this much, then that's the gap that we have now, and it doesn't account for that revenue and spending, especially because the revenue does take a little bit of time. So maybe in the 1 year we might have to kind of go past the debt, but eventually it comes back, and eventually the revenue comes in, helps pay for it. So it's just kind of a mechanism to get it in the first place, if that makes sense. So it doesn't account for the revenue and stuff like that, the debt ceiling and all that doesn't. So that'd be kind of my, I guess, response in a way.
Okay, so I don't know if you saw this, Luke, but uh, I got a notification on my phone like a day or two ago that we are sending more weapons to Ukraine.
Hmm.
More under the Trump administration. Now, why are we doing that?
Well, yeah, I think you're here. I want to make sure I pull up the article just so I have all the facts. Yeah, I heard about that. Definitely not what you would expect.
Okay, okay,
Uh,
okay.
I think we kind of have to realize some things about kind of the Ukraine situation here.
And look. That's why. Look, that is why I think that it is a mistake to raise the debt. Because like, oh, we have this much room that we can send all this money over to Ukraine or Israel or whatever. It's like, really, guys, come on.
Well, something I think is important to remember about sending weapons, right, is we don't have to really spend any money to send the weapons. The weapons that we have are already stockpiled weapons. So the money has already been spent on those weapons. So it's not spending any more money. So I think that's something important to kind of remember with the sending the weapons is that it's not like,
But
we're
then
paying.
we have to restock what we send over there.
Say that again?
Then we have to restock what we send over there.
Well, the
And
thing
so
is,
then we will have
these
to
are the
spend the money.
weapons, though. But that's the thing. It actually, in a way, and again, this is kind of what I'm a little neutral on this because I'm not convinced really by either side. But a lot of the people will say that data does show that when we, for example, send weapons to Ukraine, it boosts defense manufacturing here. Um, so it actually helps our economy in a way. That's kind of what the argument say. But again, it's not like we have to immediately pay for these things. Like the defense stockpile is like stuff we're not using. It's like it's not stuff that we made for Ukraine. It's stuff that we already weren't going to use or aren't in use right now. So in the immediate, it's not costing us anything. But in the long term, when we empty those stockpiles, yes, we do have to replenish them. But a lot of times that comes from the defense side, the actual defense contractors and people. So some studies have shown that it in fact boosts economic growth because when you send more weapons, you're boosting defense manufacturing. So in a way, it does grow that sector of the economy. But on the more kind of broader version of what you're talking about, I think it is, it is a little bit of a kind of a 180 Trump is making on Ukraine, and I think I'm of the opinion that we've sent weapons for 2-3 years, right, and has it really helped? I don't think so. So I don't know if the best way to come to peace with Putin is to say, "Hey, I'm going to keep sending weapons to your enemy." So that could be questionable. But at the same time, Putin, I mean, we don't have to be pro-Ukraine here, but we're definitely not pro-Putin either, because Putin has not made this easy. He has been unrealistic. He's been unwilling to come to the negotiating table. He has been really the main reason why this war hasn't ended in the first place. At this point in time, I mean, Zelensky's at least acknowledged that he's willing, but Putin has a lot of unrealistic requests. You're not going to get Ukraine. I think he has to realize that. And until he realizes that he's not going to get to take Ukraine, I think this war is going to keep going and keep going. But I think Trump it's kind of a strategic move here. I think it's trying to call Putin's bluff in a way. I don't necessarily, 100% like the idea of sending weapons to Ukraine, but I think we have to acknowledge that this is all kind of, part of the art of the deal. It's Trump applying the pressure to Ukraine. It's much more strategic than it's not a blank check. It's saying, okay, because Putin, I've tried. I've halted weapons spending. I've halted giving things to Ukraine, and you have not come to the negotiating table. You have been unwilling. You've said a lot of nice things, but in action, you've been lacking. So here's what I'm going to do. You keep doing this. Okay, I'm going to go send weapons to Ukraine, and we'll see what happens. So I think, we can totally be a little bit skeptical of this. And I am myself a skeptic of this. I think it could have the, damage of prolonging the war. But not funding Ukraine, in the past few months, what has it accomplished? I think Trump has seen that we are definitely closer to this war, but he needs to apply some pressure to Putin. And so I don't like the idea of sending weapons. I actually think some Republicans introduced something in the Senate, which was to sanction Russia. I think that would be more effective and sort of applying a lot of that economic pressure. I think that would be more effective than just sending, a lot of these weapons to Ukraine, because that more gets us directly involved in the conflict, and that's a little, unsettling to me, who doesn't want to get involved in foreign conflicts. So I think we have to be kind of twofold here. While we might have, might not be in 100% agreement, we do recognize that this is not an attempt to prolong the war, but it's an attempt to get Putin to come to the negotiating table. And I don't think Trump wants to see Putin defeated. He just wants to see Putin come to peace. And it's a lot like what we saw with Iran. He bombed Iran. Everyone freaked out. They said, we're going to war with Iran. And now we're on the precipice of a historic ceasefire agreement in the Middle East with, Iran, with Israel and Hamas. And we had that temporary ceasefire with Iran. And so I think, and again, I don't kind of be, saying, oh, just trust things will work out. But I think in this way, we have to be very cautious on kind of going boldly to one side or boldly to the other. We're going to have to be fully non-interventionist in Ukraine, or fully, I 100% support Ukraine. Trump has always been someone who recognizes the nuance of the situation. And I think that's what he's doing now, because his more non-interventionist method hasn't been 100% successful. He's going to try to apply some pressure. We're going to see how that works out. I think definitely it's a risky move. And all I can say is that I'm 50-50 on it. I think it's questionable, but I think if it works Putin to the negotiating table, it's good. But if it prolongs this war, then it's bad. And only time will tell. And I'm definitely not claiming to be a prognosticator of what could happen, but that's kind of where I stand on this issue.
All right. Well, I like to listen to Alex Jones, as you know, Luke.
Of course.
And we could be a little skeptical on the skeptical side of things, and I tend to, obviously, I agree with him a lot of times. And one thing that they were talking about on InfoWars today is how, like, when Trump first got into office, we're like, yes, dude, this is so good. Glad we got him in office. And then it's like, as time goes on, it's like, what is happening? Like, well, first it was like Ukraine and Russia. Then that one never got solved. And then it's like, Epstein list never got released. And then it was like the Iran, Israel and all that. Israel and Gaza and everything, and it's like, what is happening? And then another thing they were talking about is how, like, crime. Yes, they're going after like Comey and John Brennan, but crime is up, and that's at least what they were saying is and they say that crime is down, but like is if you look, and if you look at the mainstream media, they're gonna say crime is down, but at the end of the year, at the end of the year, when they post all their numbers, then they post all the actual numbers, and it's like crime goes up. Um, and I mean, if you saw, JD Vance was attacked, and what was it? They were talking about how there was a woman. They had to arrest a woman at Mar-a-Lago because I don't know, she must have been going after Trump or something. But I think they were saying she had a gun. And the thing is, you won't see these things in the mainstream media. But if you look at alternative news like Infowars or Steve Bannon, things like that, that's where you find that stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you kind of my thoughts. We'll go kind of on the realm of like things aren't quite what we expected, blah blah blah, all that. I think a lot of the people, the Steve Bannon people, and kind of more on the further right, um, aren't recognizing the tremendous wins that we have achieved. Border crossings are nearly at zero. We've never seen, at least not in recent history, something that extreme. We've completely secured the border in 6 months. Over 1 million people have already self deported, and we just secured the largest increase. I think ICE is now like the 10th best funded military in the world. So we're going to see a big increase in those mass deportations. And we're already deporting a lot of people, especially the violent criminals. We're focusing on those individuals. So border, we've completely in 6 months secured the border. And now we have that enshrined in the big, beautiful bill. We have full funding for the wall, funding for Border Patrol, for ICE, to expand those mass deportations. Um, on the Israel Hamas front, I don't think anyone can seriously say that we are not much further to peace in both Ukraine and Israel now than where we were when Trump first took office. Before Trump was office, we had no one talking to Putin. Putin would not answer Joe Biden's phone calls. We now have had a president that is actively negotiating with Putin. And so that is a huge step in the right direction. I don't think anyone can deny that we are the closest we've been to peace in both of these wars, since at the very least, since before Biden, since when these wars started under Biden. So there have been massive wins. No one thought that these wars were going to end overnight. Even when Trump said, day one I'll come in and end the war. I don't mean to sound like kind of a chud here, but I don't think anyone actively expected it to be ended in 24 hours. But I'm incredibly impressed. The fact, number one, that we have this ceasefire. Less than a year ago, Republicans were decrying something like a ceasefire, and that was really only kind of a thing on the fringe left. No one thought it could happen. Now it's happening, which is a big step in the right direction. We now are in the talks. We are nearing a historic ceasefire, not just a temporary one, but really one that could provide lasting peace. So I think we cannot ignore those, fundamental realities that we are much, much more closer to peace now than we were, at the beginning of this administration and during the Biden years. And so I think those are huge wins, not just for our country, but for the world. And I think with, the Iran stuff, especially the bombing, I think we're now starting to see why he did that. It has not launched us, contrary to what a lot of the further right people said, we are not in a war with Iran. It has not launched us into a full-scale war with Iran. In fact, we are now at the peace table with Iran. We're trying to negotiate a peace deal. So again, I could be totally wrong on all these predictions, but I think we cannot fundamentally, we cannot recognize, or we have to recognize, that we are much closer to peace than we were when we, were under Biden. And I think that's a huge win. As far as the Epstein thing went, I think that is, a setback. The Justice Department, when Pam Bondi and, Kash Patel took office, they said they were going to do all these things. And they haven't. I don't think you can blame that on Trump, though. I think, unfortunately, a lot of this is some of the stuff we saw in the first term, where the bureaucracy is holding things up, and I think that's what's happening is they don't have access to a lot of the things, but they're still being incredibly transparent. They had the most thorough. I think now we're at least starting to get a lot of the documents of Epstein released. We got the JFK files released, which again was kind of a nothing burger. It didn't have a lot of stuff in there. It pointed that the CIA might have done some stuff. But again, they're working with what they have. I think an administration is never going to 100% be what we fully want. I think really the only real area of disappointment is that Epstein client list, and I hope that that's going to progress as more things come out. But I think on almost every other front, with Israel and Ukraine, we're closer to peace. Trump's negotiating with both sides. We're talking with Putin now. With Israel and Hamas, we're working. We're very close to a ceasefire. With Iran, we bombed them, but now we're starting to come to the peace table. We have virtually zero border crossings. Our border's secure. ICE is fully funded. The wall is fully funded. Deportations are ramping up. 1 million have already self-deported. We have passed the largest domestic piece of conservative legislation in decades. We cannot ignore that all of those things are massive wins. And if we really need to figure out, has Trump done what he said he's going to do? Ask the Democrats, because they're all saying Trump has done exactly what he is going to do. And that's because he is. And so I think really this administration has been an overwhelming success. Are there some shortcomings? Sure, there always is. But I think we cannot ignore fundamentally that this is a very successful presidency so far. At least that's my opinion of it.
Okay, so Luke, I'm really glad that you are more optimistic and more centered than I am, because I am much more skeptical and have a little bit slightly more negative view than you do. But
well, that's good. We need our skeptics. They're the people, the people who are complaining about the big beautiful bill and all that. We might not like their complaints, but that was one of the reasons why we did get some more conservative things in the bill, like the Medicare reductions and all that stuff. So, it's essential to have these voices. I'm probably a little more of an optimist than you, but we have to have these sort of people like you and, more skeptics. And I think it's good to be a skeptic. I'm a skeptic, but probably not as much. But we got to have the skeptics. It's good.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear what you see on this front. Okay, so one thing that I really noticed was when Trump decided he was going to bomb Iran, and then when he did that, you had people like the Hodge twins, and then you had Alex Jones, and then you had, who was another one? I think Candace Owens may have been one of them. Steve Bannon was definitely one of them, and they were all before Trump actually went and bombed Iran. Like, they were like, Trump, do not do this. And Steve Bannon even went to the White House and spoke with him privately. Like, look, you really don't want to do this. And then you had people like oh gosh, Laura Loomer, dude, she was like unhinged. She was unhinged, dude. And then you had people like
not on our
Mark
side.
Levin. Mark Levin is like he's sold out to like Israel. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, but like those people, and like it was like
Telling me
there's like a big like the
influencer is more of an Israel supporter. Wow, that's wild. I like Mark Levin.
Wait, say that again.
I like Mark Levin. He's a little on the more pro, hawkish side, but yeah. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so anyways, but like the whole like the MAGA movement and everything, like it's fractured because people are fed up with this whole Israel Middle East stuff. They're fed up, and they're fed up with like Trump kowtowing and bowing down to Netanyahu. Like, Trump just had Netanyahu in the White House today, or in DC today. And I think people are just tired of it. They're tired of, because, I mean, look, Netanyahu was like, oh, Iran is going to have nuclear missiles very soon. He's been saying that for years now. He's been saying the same thing for so long, okay? And what I'm trying to say is, people like where it's fractured, And look, when after Trump bombed Iran, I'm gonna be honest, I was pretty upset. Like I was very mad, and I spoke with my someone in my family about it. We were talking about it, and I used a different word for it. I was like, I am very mad, using a different word, and because I just felt like it was like, why did he do this? And honestly, it was. And then you saw the same thing that happened when he was first in office, where he, um, I think, Abdir Baghdadi, after that, and then, or no, it was Soleimani. When after they took him out, then Iran's like, okay, well, we've got a safe face, so we're gonna miss bomb here. Don't, everything can be okay. Just move everything, and so they did, and so everything's okay. And the same thing, it looked like it's happened this time. But then it's like Israel was like, okay, well now you have to do this, and it's like, really, come on. And I don't know if you see, but then you also see on like social media. I mean, I see it on X all the time about how is the IDF. They say they're giving aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, but then you always see how they're being shot when they go get them. Or I even saw just today that um, two girls were out going to get food or aid, and then on their way back, they were killed. They were shot. They were killed. So, and people are just fed up with the whole is kowtowing to Israel, bowing down to Israel, anti-Semitism, crying anti-Semitism, and all this. And so I just want to know, like, do you see that?
I think I certainly think that just because you're you don't pledge a blood oath to Israel, that certainly doesn't make you an anti-Semite. I think some people on the right do have a problem of kind of attributing something like anti-Semitism to people who just have disagreements. Now, is there anti-Semitism in the anti-Israel camp? I mean, I think you and I both know the answer to that. There's certainly plenty of anti-Israel people who are anti-Semitic, but I don't think just because you disagree with Israel, that makes you an anti-Semite. I think a lot of the neocons in the party kind of throw anti-Semite anywhere, when you don't fully support Israel, which I think obviously is not true. But at the same thing with Israel, we have to remember that they were sending planes into Iran, and President Trump called Bibi Netanyahu and said, "Send them back. You're not going to do that." He called out Israel, said, "Israel, stop." He said, "Israel's pissing me the hell off." He said, but also he's hasn't fully made Netanyahu happy. So I think we have to kind of recognize the dynamics here between you have to pick a side. You have to pick a side in a way as like when you're involved in this conflict. Who are we going to be more friendly to? Are we to be more friendly to the country that chants death to America, the country that harbors terrorism, or are we going to be more friendly to Israel, the only really democracy in the Middle East and the only really U.S. ally we have, strong U.S. ally in the Middle East? So I think that's one of the reasons why we see such strong support, because they are in a critical location, critical for U.S. interests. Now, I think some geo people go overboard. We do not have a biblical, commandment to, send Israel money or whatever. That's silly. And I think even a lot of, a lot of people, a lot of the pro-Israel people, at least I've heard, in my friend group and all that, have laughed at that and said, that's not the case. But what I don't think I think with Trump is he's definitely more pro-Israel than he is pro, Hamas or pro-Iran. I mean, certainly we don't want Trump to be kowtowing to Iran or kowtowing to Hamas. And so it's one of those instances where I think, unfortunately, you have to side with someone. And with inviting Netanyahu to the White House, we have to remember, why was he inviting Netanyahu to the White House? Was he inviting to give more money to Israel to do those things? No. He invited Netanyahu to the White House this time to end the war. He wants to end the war. He wants peace. And so I think you could say, that a lot of the times, it does seem like Trump is supposedly owned by Israel or whatever. But I think we can't ignore that he has broken with Israel a lot of times. And so obviously he's going to be more aligned with Israel than he is going to be, terrorist countries that chant death to America, obviously. But at the same time, he has pushed back on Israel. He has said, he got Netanyahu to send those planes back. And so I don't think, Netanyahu sort of controls Trump. I think Trump is more sided with Netanyahu, but I don't think that means he's necessarily controlled by Trump, mainly because of the things I said, because he has actually gone against Israel multiple times. I think we do have to recognize the strategic importance of Israel and the fact that they're the only really U.S. interest aligned country in the Middle East, and that's important. So we definitely don't want to be siding with Iran. We don't want to be siding with Hamas. And I'm not saying it's either or, but I think in this case, the president has been very pragmatic. I don't think he's negotiated with Hamas and Iran when he has to, and he's done the same with Israel. Obviously, he's going to be more on the Israel side. So that's kind of how I look at it. I wouldn't say Netanyahu is controlling him or anything. But as far as I just kind of want to touch on something else you said about kind of the GOP. I don't think this is the same as the first term. At the first term, 6 months in, we didn't have a secure border. At the first term, 6 months in, we didn't pass 90% of our domestic policy legislation. In the first term, we didn't have pretty much unanimous support from the House in getting these things done. In the first term, we didn't have increased border patrol funding, increased ICE agents. We didn't have mass deportations in the first term. So I think we're definitely much better than the first term. And we're not having these turnovers. We didn't have people like Tulsi Gabbard, like RFK in the administration in the first term. So I think it's definitely much different in the first term. I think the Republican Party is actually far more united. I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, Laura Loomer, I don't think those are the voices of the Republican Party. They do not represent the majority of the Republican Party. They do not even represent a majority of the MAGA wing, in my opinion. So I think if we look at the majority of MAGA, I think, at least compared to the first term, we're much more united. And that's showing in the results that we've delivered, really most fundamentally in the big, beautiful bill. At this time in the first term, we had Senate rhinos fighting over each other, getting the tax cuts passed. We had John McCain, thumbs down on Obamacare. We had Speaker Paul Ryan, a rhino who really didn't help Trump at all. So we have a fundamental different, situation that we're in. But yeah, that's what I think. We're definitely much different than the first term, though, and I think Trump has sided with Israel, but I think for strategic reasons because they are the only democracy and only pro-U.S. country, really pro-U.S. country in that area, and it's important. If we're going to side with someone, if we're going to work for peace, we have to bring in both sides, and I think he's done a good job at bringing in both sides, but we can't expect him to be more on the side of the terrorists of Hamas, of Iran, than of Israel. Obviously, he's going to be more on the side of Israel, and I think that makes sense. But I think compared to like the Lindsey Grahams of the Republican Party, I would not say, Trump's not going out here saying, the Bible told me to send $10 billion to Israel. I don't think Trump's saying that. I think what Trump's saying is, I want peace. And you can see Lindsey Graham and a lot of the other people were actually kind of mad that Trump hasn't full on gone for regime change in Iran, hasn't been just beholden to. So I think Trump's doing as best as he can to navigate a very tense and difficult political situation. But yeah, that's my take.
Well, I am thankful for your balanced approach, Luke, because, like I said, I am very much skeptical when it goes to these things, and might have to do something with the news media that I consume these days. But I just want to point something else out real quick, and then maybe we can call it good. But I think there's a good perspective that was on things, and because Alex Jones had held a debate on Infowars, and you would love this. The debate was between two people that were complete opposites. Okay, Nick Fuentes,
There's
all
Dinesh
right,
D'Souza.
and Dinesh D'Souza. Okay, yeah, and Nick Fuentes was against the bombing of Iran, and Dinesh D'Souza was saying that it's a good thing that it happened. And or something about that, or maybe it was regime change. I don't something. Anyways, regime change was in the debate, so that's kind of why I think that's what's making me think that it was what the debate was over. But anyways, regime change was brought up and everything, but basically, and then Owen Schroyer, who's in Infowars, and he's a third Infowars show of the day. He's the final show as well. But he did a separate clip of himself, and he was talking about how there's a split. Okay, there's a split between the people from Dinesh's generation, and then you have the younger generation, and the older generation sees it as sees things from the past and sees how they went. No. Anyways, it's something about the generational split, and people from the younger generation are not in favor of the bombing of Iran. They're not in favor of Israel. I would say just like doing what we're doing with Israel. I mean, they want to just leave everything as it is and just let them duke it out. That's really, I mean, simplify it down. That's what they're saying. And then Alex Jones was like, okay, so I'm trying to look for good questions that are on Dinesh's side, or like looking for people that are on Dinesh's side. He was looking online, and he said that he could not find anyone who was on Dinesh's side. Everyone was on Nick Fuentes' side. It's like, why? Like, and I just want to get. I'm sorry, maybe not why, but I want to get what your thoughts are on that, because I'm going to be honest. I'm on the side of Nick Fuentes. I think we should just stay out of it, let him duke it out, because I don't want to be. I'm tired. Honestly, I really am tired of just like. And I feel like I remember when we were doing the podcast over this summer. That's something that was always talked about was anti-Semitism, and I remember, and it's like that now. And then the Trump administration is going after anti-Semitism so hard, and it might have to do something with how the Biden administration did not do anything. And I'm not saying that was a better approach, but I think that maybe going after anti-Semitism so hard, like the MAGA base, the MAGA movement, we're so fatigued. We're tired of the anti-Semitism. Going after that. I mean, it's. I mean, they went after it in the college academia side. So I'll be quiet, and I want to hear what you had to say about that.
Well, I think as far as Nick Fuentes' comments on Iran, I mean, the after this bombing happened, he said we're going full-fledged war with Iran. Trump's supporting regime change. Really blackpilling, and you're gonna ask yourself now that we know where we're at. Was any of his predictions about what bombing Iran would happen, or any of his predictions correct? No. We're not in a full-fledged war with Iran. We're on the peace table with Iran now. We're having peace negotiations. We have a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. So I think Nick Fuentes has some valid concerns about Iran. I think as far as the anti-Semitism goes, I mean, I get kind of the argument about, we're tired of anti-Semitism, but I think at least on Nick's behalf, I would say he's probably said some anti-Semitic things. I think we could both agree on that. He might not be the best example of the further right not being anti-Semitic, because I think he's definitely he's expressed support for Hitler. He's openly said that he support Hitler and all these things. So I think we have to be careful about that. But Yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to be upset with kind of a lot of the rhetoric around anti-Semitism. I think it is totally a trope that's kind of overplayed. I get that, and I think we could be upset with that. But I think we also can't let more of the extreme people like Nick Fuentes, people who've openly praised Hitler, openly proclaimed white supremacist. I don't think we can let people like that define the Republican Party, define our policy. And so I think we just have to take, some of the good things from him, but recognize too that he's not this godly force. He's not, a Jesus reincarnate. He has some very much questionable things. But I think you're in the right. I think your concerns are valid, and I think I had the same concerns. I did not really want to see him bomb Iran, honestly, and I was kind of like, why did he do this? I had the same fears that you and probably Nick Fuentes, all these people had was like, oh no, this is just going to throw us into war with Iran. But look at what has happened. We're not in a war with Iran. We're on the peace table. We're in peace negotiations. So I think we have to recognize while we might not have agreed with it, and we could be against it, we have to see that Trump clearly did this for a reason. And at least so far, it's working out more in the favor of Trump than it is, for anyone else. So I think that's important. I think on the anti-Semitism thing, though, I think you are correct in the kind of notion that it's overused. It's kind of an overused trope. Oh, you're an anti-Semite, blah blah. And I think the people see through it. It's just like when the leftists try to call us racist, stuff like that. The people see through that. So I think that's fine. But as far as the prosecuting anti-Semitism goes, I mean, there are, of these people that were, deporting for supposed anti-Semitism, it wasn't just that they said, I don't like Israel, is that they were openly harboring or expressing support for terrorist organizations, which I don't think we can tolerate. And I think we need to get rid of on our college campuses. So I think that was more the notion, more at least kind of the justification that I saw. But yeah, I think we're definitely at a kind of turning point in the Republican Party where we're starting to turn away from a lot of those hawkish, ideas and turning more non-interventionist, what I think is good. But I think at the same time, we have to recognize that Trump doesn't fit into either of those camps. He's definitely not a neocon, but he's no non-interventionist either. He's really sort of a realist and kind of he just wants peace. It's called peace through strength. He's going to make both sides mad, and I think we have to recognize that. But I certainly don't see a problem with Republicans being a little more skeptical of this. I think in many cases it's warranted, but I do think we just have to be careful, recognizing it's not fully one way or fully the other. We can have a nuanced approach to this without subscribing strictly to a certain set of ideologies on like foreign policy. I think we have to do what puts America first, and that's really full stop. If it's looking like now this Iran bombing thing worked out. I could be wrong in the future, but at least right now, a lot of those concerns about the Iran bombing thing have not come to fruition. And I think stuff like that is what we have to remember. So yeah, I think again, I don't think Nick Fuentes represents a majority of the Republican Party. I think most would say that an open white supremacist anti-Semite does not represent the majority of the party. But at the same time, the super pro-Israel, the super God said send 10 billion to Israel. Those people also don't define the Republican Party. I think what defines the Republican Party is this more pragmatist Trump peace through strength approach, which is we're going to put America first, but we're going to apply the pressure on you to come to the negotiating table. And I think that's what he's trying to do. And I think that's where a majority of the Republican Party is at. But as with anything, I could be wrong. But that's where I'm at.
All right. Well, just to close things up. I would, like I said, I'm thankful for your balanced approach to things, and I think that I listening to Alex Jones, you like to look at the bigger picture and look at things like what's how things have been going, big picture wise, and then listening to Alex Jones, like he talks about all these little details and like people behind the scenes and in like things that are going wrong, and it might be that might be where I'm coming from, but I'm really glad that you were able to give that balanced approach because it does help me, it does, and it helps me be a little more optimistic about things, and so hopefully I'll be able to do another podcast episode in the future. I'll be able to do this until September. Some news coming about that later on. But in the meantime, thank you again, Luke.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I don't know, just one thing to close on is, it's good